Hello YouTube, this is Peter with you once again, and let's talk about all those Republicans who are now saying, okay, maybe one more endless war. Because here's the thing, I'm not surprised by it in the least. And in all honesty, this is one of the aspects of MAGA that I have always found most galling. Why? Because understand that I was one of those people who was against our endless wars before it was cool, like before we got into them. And so to see a Trump rally, even all the way back in 2016, and these rallies are full primarily of Fox News loving, voted for Bush twice, called anyone who had the temerity to question going into Iraq a blame America first terrorist loving traitor, that these people would suddenly cheer when Donald Trump says no more endless war. Yeah, I never believed for one moment that they suddenly discovered some sort of anti-war principle. My theory of the case is and always has been that they got buyer's remorse. Here is what you will rarely, if ever, hear any of these people do. Number one, admit that they supported the war to begin with. Number two, admit that they were duped primarily by things like Fox News. That's something you hear all the time. Well, Bush lied. Bush lied. Okay, great. Except the news agencies and even some of the news anchors that pushed those lies relentlessly, you still believe them. They are still the exact same gullible people they were before, and Trump's election lies prove that, beyond a shadow of a doubt. Bush administration officials went on television and made a bunch of claims based on what they said was evidence that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, and people believe them. Trump administration officials went on television and claimed, with far less evidence than the Bush administration showed, that there was election interference. So they didn't learn anything about the nature of being lied to and whether or not they can trust politicians and the media. They still go on, by and large, believing the same news sources, the same pundits. But would they ever admit that, hey, maybe all those people that told us that this is a bad idea were right? Because it's not as if no one said that the war could turn into a quagmire, that the country of Iraq could devolve into civil war, that we could be there for years. There were people before we invaded Iraq who were saying all of this. No, they'll never admit that. They will never admit that the blame America first, terrorist-loving traitors were right and they were wrong. They'll say that Bush lied, but never admit that they themselves were duped. They all want to pretend that they had nothing to do with it, even if they voted for Bush twice. And there was a song that came out by a country artist, of course it's a country artist, named Daryl Worley, and this song came out just before we invaded Iraq, and it became the kind of anthem for the Fox News crowd type people. It was called Have You Forgotten? And at the time, I found this song to be ridiculous and repugnant. But, oh boy, am I so glad that song exists now. Gather round, youngins, as Uncle Peter is going to explain the mentality that the Fox News watching, flag-waving, future Trump voters of America had after 9/11 and what got them into our endless wars. The song perfectly captures the emotional blackmail, the blind belligerence, the ignorance of geopolitics, and the jingoism that got us into our endless wars. And it's surprisingly, unintentionally self-aware. There's a line that says, "They say we don't realize the mess we're getting in. Before you start your preaching, let me ask you this, my friend." Again, they were warned. It's not as if no one said, hey, this could go sideways in any number of ways. And the response of the future MAGA voters of America were, oh yeah, well, 9/11. There's another surprisingly self-aware line in the song where it says, some say this country is just out looking for a fight. Well, after 9/11, man, I'd have to say that's right. And that is a perfect encapsulation. Americans would have bombed Canada after September 11th. In my opinion, what led to the Fox News watching, voted for George W. Bush twice crowd to cheer when Trump said no more endless wars at rallies, again, wasn't because they had suddenly realized some new principle. It's because the war became increasingly tiresome. In the early 90s, we had a war with Iraq in which we defeated them rather easily. Out of that war came all sorts of videos and documentaries about what cool high-tech weapon systems we have. The early footage of smart bombs being dropped. And this became a staple of particularly cable television. And it reignited America's infatuation with its own military and its own sense of power. After the Cold War, it felt like we were completely unrivaled in the world. And some people honestly itched for the chance to see our bloated, expensive global military put to use, because it would make great television. But then, as the war ground on for months and then years, they got tired of it. They got buyer's remorse. It became something they wanted to put away in a closet and forget about. It wasn't fun and exciting. The actual consequences of the war for the people who fought in it, for the hundreds of thousands of civilians who died, directly or indirectly, nope, that they by and large didn't care about. And so, as the American people always do, they circle back around to self-contradiction. If I had to point to the number one problem in our politics, it is that the people cannot decide what they want because they don't even have the self-awareness to realize the often self-contradictory nature of their own beliefs. But that is multiple videos unto itself. But in this particular case, let's talk about the mentality that we should be America first and not care about what's going on in the rest of the world and not try and militarily intervene. That would be a great idea, except most of those same people have no interest whatsoever in scaling back the United States military to the point where it was appropriate to what they say they want. In reality, and this is seldom pointed out, the United States military and the military-industrial complex is a kind of socialism and planned economy on a micro scale. So no, we're not going to help the average citizen with healthcare or college. Why would we want to do that, even though it would be for the benefit of society as a whole? We are going to make you earn that if you're willing to join the military. Now, some of you are probably thinking, well, Peter, socialism is actually the government giving things away. To which I would say, no, not exactly. If you actually look at the Soviet Union, pretty much everyone had a job. In fact, that was part of the problem. Most of their jobs were inefficient and useless. So there's the classic example of a Soviet grocery store where, let's say that you wanted to go to the meat department. It would take 3 different people to do what in the United States would be at most the job of one person. So there was jobs for everyone. Everyone worked, but whether or not those jobs were necessary or busy work probably tended towards busy work. There was also a saying in the Soviet Union that we pretend to work, they pretend to pay us. So no, socialism doesn't mean that nobody works. Our system of military recruitment and weapons procurement basically acts as something akin to a planned economy, socialized medicine, socialized education. Join the military, get healthcare, get the GI Bill to pay for college. And believe me, as somebody who grew up a military brat, I faced more pressure than most people to join the military. Joining the military is pitched as one of those things that's going to solve all the problems that the normal market forces don't necessarily take care of. Again, jobs program, healthcare program, college program. And we have numerous companies in this country whose primary purpose is to create weapon systems for the military. Again, oftentimes the government struggles to cut certain weapon systems because it has a factory in some town that's important to some senator and or congressperson. So we have an entire network of manufacturing jobs centered around our military-industrial complex, entire areas and towns that rely on these bases, these weapon manufacturer jobs. It's all planned out and contracted through the government. Not completely a planned economy system, but probably closer to the managed economic system of somewhere like China. Now, obviously, this isn't the entire economy, but it's a non-trivial portion of the economy. And this is part of the dirty little secret of why we can't actually have a mind our own business and defend ourselves military. There's too much money to be made having a massive, globe-spanning, bloated military. Aside from the fact that it was buyer's remorse and not actual principle that would have them cheering for a line like "No More Endless War." The other reason that so many Republicans can shrug and say, okay, maybe one more endless war, is because of the psychology of the typical American conservative. They simply believe that force, violence, and threat and fear are part of how society is ordered. They believe this very often on an individual, familial level. They believe this about society as a whole, and they believe this about the world in general. So, of course, they back the idea of the United States having the strongest military in the world. There's no amount of money they're unwilling to spend because it's more the idea of it rather than the practicality of it. A military designed for the explicit purpose of defending the American homeland would be completely different than the military we have. A standing army, a fleet centered around aircraft carriers, these are the sorts of things that you have when you want to go get in other people's business. A defensive military would be vastly scaled back and configured differently. But right now we're at an interesting point in history where they say they want America first, they don't want to fight any more endless wars, they want to spend that money here at home, but also don't blink when Donald Trump proposes vast increases to the military budget along with, paying for his ballroom. But again, this is just exactly the sort of thoughtless, run-of-the-mill self-contradiction I have basically come to expect from the American people. We got Tough Guy Pete and his maximum lethality war fighters in charge at the Pentagon, and it seems like the situation in Iran is one where they were high on their own supply. They once again thought it would be easy and over quickly. And that's how we can have Republicans who go from being the loudest cheerleaders of our endless wars to being against our endless wars to saying, okay, maybe one more endless war. So I hope you all enjoy your outrageous gas prices, and I hope that cleared up any confusion you might be having on the subject. Until next time, have a good whatever time it is.